Saral Japani, Japanese learning made easy. Konnichiwa minasan. Hey friends, how are you? Welcome to Saral Japani YouTube channel. This is a place where we talk about Japan and Japanese. Friends, this is the playlist called Japanese Lessons for Beginners, and today we are at lesson 112. The topic for today is Rules of Verb Conjugation Part 2, and in today's lesson we shall learn about the past tense form of Group 1 stem verbs. If you remember, in the previous lesson, we started to learn about the rules of verb conjugation, and in which we talked about the mass form, that is the present tense form of the four categories of Japanese verbs. So we will continue with that discussion in today's lesson and we'll learn new things. So first, we will do some recap of the last lesson because today's lesson is completely dependent on the previous lesson. That means the prerequisite of today's video is the previous video. So my suggestion is, if you have not watched the previous video, then please do so, so that you understand today's lesson in a better manner. In the last lesson, we learned about several things. Let's summarize them. What is a stem or a base form, or which is also called the plain form of a verb? Why verb conjugation is necessary, in which we talked about the requirement of tense and several other things. Without this verb would not be specific meaning. It will just indicate some kind of action, but when the action has been taken place, how the action has taken place, and some other characteristics of that action will not be distinctively explained using the stem form. So that's why the verb conjugation is necessary. Parts of a conjugated verb. So there are basically three parts in conjugated verb. First is the stem kanji. Then we have a middle part which comes out through the rules of the verb conjugation. And finally, the ending is the conjugation, which is to be mas or mashita or the informal forms as well. So in this way, there are three parts of a conjugated verb, which we discussed briefly in the previous lesson. Then we discussed about the generic rules of mass and stem form of verbs in a sentence, in which we learned that there can be only one mass form in a sentence. So if it is a simple sentence, then it is easy to understand. But if it is a compound sentence, that means a sentence where there are more than one verbs, then only one verb, the main verb, will have the mass form, and which will be at the end of the sentence. And all other verbs, if they are present in the sentence, will take the plain form, that is the stem form, and some other form other than the mass form. So which we will keep learning as we go in this course forward. So this is how the mass and the stem forms of verbs form part of a compound sentence. And then we discussed about the four categories of verbs, which we had discussed earlier in a previous lesson. We recapped those four categories of verbs, group 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the previous lesson. And then we talked about the stem form to mass form conversion rules of each of these four groups of Japanese verbs. So all this we did in the previous lesson, and we shall see some more information which we gave in the previous lesson before we start today's content. So group 1 verbs. You might remember we discussed that group 1 verbs are those verbs that end in u sound. That is, that end in. So as we discussed earlier in the previous lesson, that it is better to write in English in Roman script, so that you understand how these conversions are taking place. So if the verbs end in u, for example, iku, kairu, au, kau, nomu, and so on, then these verbs are called godandoshi, and these are also called consonant stems. So these stems, iku, au, nomu, yomu, these are all consonant stems. Why? Because if we remove this u, then the remaining the previous The remaining stem, it ends in a consonant sound. For example, if we remove U here, it ends in M, which is a consonant, no. So that's why it is called a consonant stem. So similarly, if you look at all these, Hanasu, if you remove U, then it becomes Hanas. Suvaru, Haku, and so on. So there are some exclusions as well, exceptions as well. For example, cow, because if we remove U, then it's A, which is A, which is a vowel, it's not a consonant. Similarly for ow. So there are definitely some exceptions, but in general, if you remove the U sound, then it is left with the consonant sound at the end. And that's why these verbs are called consonant stem verbs. Now, how to convert these group 1 verbs to their mass form? So this is the rule. Minus U plus ins. That means you have to remove the U at the end and replace it with imas. That means iku becomes ikimas. So you are removing U and you are adding imas. So it is easier to visualize it in English, because if you write in Japanese, then since each sound has a different symbol, so the this distinctive difference will not come out. So that's why we write more in English to make clear the differences. So iku becomes ikimas, kaeru becomes kaerimas, au becomes aimas, kau becomes kaimas, nomu nomimas, yomu yomimas, hashiru hashirimas, hanas hanashimas, suvaru suvarimas, kaku kakimas, kiku kikimas, aruku arukimas, kiru kirimas, hataraku hatarakimas. So the meanings have been given here, and the Japanese versions in hiragana as well as kanji is given. So ikimas, this is ik. And you can see here the kanji portions of each of these and the remaining portion in hiragana. So you will see you are seeing 3 of these which are written in English, in red characters. So eru, iru, iru. So these 3 are kind of exceptions, because these iru and iru, these are group 2 words, the characteristics of group 2 words, but these are actually group 1 words, and that's the exceptions in this group 1. So this we have seen in the previous lesson. Similarly, this is of group 2 words, verbs ending in U or EU. These are called equivalent, and these are called vowel stems, because if you remove the at the end, then you are left with a vowel at the end. That means if you remove ru, there is a. So a is vowel. Then if you remove ru here, it is me, that is e sound. So it is vowel stem. So the conversion formula is minus ru plus mas. That means this is much easier. So you just remove ru and add mas. So taberu becomes tabemas, miru becomes mimas, neru becomes nemas, okiru becomes okimas, shimeru becomes shimemas, akeru becomes akemas, wakeru becomes wakemas, wareru becomes waremas, shiraberu becomes shirabemas. So these are the meanings that are given here. You can pause and go through each of these meanings of these verbs. And also you can go through the hiragana and the kanji versions of these verbs. So now the next is your group 3 verbs recap. So there are just 2 irregular verbs, kimas, shimas. That is kuru and suru in this category. Kimas or kuru means to come. That means if you are in some place and you are talking about coming to that place, then you use the verb kimas. Similarly, shimas or suru, these two forms of this suru is means to do something, to do some work or do something. So suru and puru, these are group 3 verbs. And group 4 verbs is a combination of noun and this verb suru. That means to do some specific activities for which the verb is a noun. For example, benkyo suru or benkyo shimas. Benkyo means study, which is the noun form. And if you say benkyo shimas, then it means to study. That means it becomes a verb. Similarly, soji shimas or soji suru, that means to clean up. Shuri shimas or shuri suru, to repair something. Kaimono shimas, to shop. Denwa suru, to telephone. That is to talk over the telephone, to call someone. So in this way, these are the 4 categories of verbs and their stem forms or base forms or plain forms in the present tense. So this we discussed in the previous lesson. So now we begin our today's one,
which is the group 1 verbs past tense form. So we will see how to convert the stem verbs to their past tense form for group 1. So we take this example of the verb gambaru. Gambaru, as you can see here, it ends in u sound and hence it is a group 1 verb. Gambaru means to do one's best. That means to do hard work. For example, student, if we say some student is doing his best to score well in the exam, then this gambaru verb will
by following that rule that we discussed last time. U is replaced with imas. So gambaru becomes gambarimas. And in the past tense, it will be gambari mashta. So this is easy because this we know from earlier discussions as well. Gambaru becomes gambarimas. Gambari mashta. Next, what happens? Gambari mashta. Now, how to convert it to the plain form? That is the past tense of the plain form. That means what will be the past tense of gambaru? The past tense of gambarimas is gambarimashta. The past tense of gambaru is gambarta. Now, how we are arriving at this? Gambarimashta, we have to remove this entire thing which is written in red, rimashta. So, gambarimashta, we have to remove rimashta and simply add TTA, that is gambatta. So, gambaru becomes gambarta. So, this is the generic rule of converting a group 1 stem verb from its present form to its past form. Gambaru becomes gambar. Similarly, let's try another one. Suvaru. Suvaru means to sit. Suvaru plain form is Suvaru and its mass form is Suvarimas. Past tense of Suvarimas is Suvarimashta and hence Suvarimashta becomes Suvarta. So we need to remove Rimashta and add TTA. So Suvaru, Suvarta. Similarly, Savaru, which means to touch, Savaru is Savatta. Agaru, which means to rise or to go up in the ladder, Agaru, Agarimas, Agarimashta, and hence it is Agatta by removing Rimashta. Now, another one, Hajimaru. Hajimaru means to begin. And Hajimari Mashta. And Hajimari Mashta becomes Hajimatta. So the past tense of Hajimaru is Hajimatta by following this rule. Toru. Toru means to take. Torimas, Torimashta, and Torimashta becomes Totta. Because the entire Rimashta is replaced with TTA, so Totta. Toru, Totta. Now, this is an interesting one, Kiru, which means to cut, and hence Kiru becomes Kirimas, Kirimashta, Kirimashta becomes Kitta. So the past tense of Kiru is Kitta, it means to cut. Now, Kiru, this verb is also part of the group 2 verb. So there are 2 Kiru. One is group one verb, which is this one, to cut, and the other is a group two verb. So what is that? That means to wear. So now, since this is IRU, so that's why this is also present in the group two category, where this iru is the ending, which means to wear. And kiru, past tense becomes kimas, because we have to remove this ru and we have to just replace it with mas according to the rule of the group two. So kiru becomes kimas and kimas becomes kimashta, and the group two rule, which we will discuss later, kimashta becomes kita. So we have not yet discussed this rule. This is I have provided here just to tell you that there are two kirus. One is to cut, this is a group one word, and one is to wear, which is a group two word. So for now, just stick to this kiru, to cut, kiru, kirimas, kirimashta, kirimas, kitta. And you know about uh, the negative forms and other forms, which we will discuss later again in relation to the past tense. So now here is the list. So now this is the thing, friends. So in group one, present tense form of the base forms, the stem verbs, there are not many exceptions. In the present tense, there are not many exceptions. There are few exceptions which we have discussed. But in the past tense form of those group one verbs, there are a hell lot of exceptions. So that's why it is very, very important to study very sincerely and very carefully about the past tense forms of the group one stem verbs, because there are lots of exceptions. So let's go through one by one. The first one is the verb iku, ikimas, which means to go. In past tense, mass form, it is ikimashita, and the past tense form of the stem verb is itta by following the rule. So TTA. So ikimas or iku becomes itta. The ku is removed and it becomes just itta. So why the ku has been removed? So now if you see the kanji, so this is the kanji of in the iku, it is the e, and we have the ku in hiragana. And similarly for ikimas, we write this kanji for e, and then we write e in hiragana and mas in hiragana. So when we write the past tense of the form, we only retain the kanji portion of that, and that's why only the e is written here in the kanji, and the rest is the conjugation from the rule, which is titietta. So that's why this is itta. So it will not be ikitta, it will be itta. This is because we simply take the kanji portion, and kanji portion sounds here as e. We only take the kanji and followed by the TTA. So itta. Similarly for aimas, it is aimashta and it is atta, because here this kanji represents the complete I. So this is the a. Basically, in au, this is the a, and we have u. Similarly, for aimas, this is only for a, and then we write e in hiragana and mas. But here, this ta, so atta. So it will not be aita, it will be atta. This is the reason why we have atta and not aita, because we simply take the kanji portion, which is a, and followed by the conjugation. Kaimas, kaimashta. This is the stem verb kau, which means to purchase. And for similar reason, it is katta, because here the kanji denotes only ka portion of that, not the u portion. Then we have nomimas or nomu, which means to drink, nomimashta. So now the verbs that are written in this pink color, these are the exceptions. So now there is no TTA, this is nonda. So nomimashta, this is not nomishta, it is nomimashta. Sorry for this spelling mistake. So it becomes nonda. So nomu, past tense is nonda. Similarly, yomimas, that is to read. yomimashita, and yomu becomes yonda here. So here this kanji is for no, and then this na and da. Similarly, yonda. Next is hashiru. So this is again an exception, hashiru. This should have been a group two verb because this ends in iru, but actually this is a group one verb. So there are several others as I just mentioned. So hashiru here it doesn't becomes hashimas because if it had been a group two verb then it would have become hashimas. But it is not hashimas, it is hashirimas by following the group one rule, which means to run. And past tense is hashirimasta and hashitta. Hashitta is the plain form past tense of hashiru. And since this is TTA, itta, so this follows the generic rule and this is not an exception. So that's why it's written in room color. And this is hashi and just ta, hashita. Next is hanas, hanashimas, hanashimashta, and hanashta. This is not hanashta. This is not the TTA, but it is shta, hanashta. So this is again an exception. So this is hanashta. This is hanashta. Suvarimas, suvaru, suvarimashta, suvatta, which we discussed in the previous slide as well. Then we have kakimas, to write, kakimashta, and kaita. So now we don't write kaita, it is kaita. So it is just ita. So ka is for this one, and this is the ita. Kikimas, kiku, to listen, kikimashta, it is again kita, kita. So this is ki and this is ita. Aruku, aruita, similarly, which means to walk. Asobu, to play, asobimashita. And now this is again follows the same as nonda, yonda. So this is asonda, which means to play, asonda. And kairu, kairimas, which means to return home, kairimashita. And this is kaetta. So now this is also not an exception because now this kanji, it denotes the kai. This is the complete kai. And so kai is this and then TTA, kai and TTA, kai. So this follows the generic rule of group one verbs in its past tense form. So this is not an exception. So in this way, you have to practice and you have to understand why some of the portions have been struck off.
And some of that remains based on this kanji and the conjugation endings. So next is some more exceptions in group one verbs. So this slide is from the previous lesson in which we discussed about some exceptions in the present tense form. So if you remember,
we had discussed these sounds. That means the stem verbs which ends in these sounds. That is ku, gu, bu, su, nu, au, su, and mu. So stem verbs that end in these generally have exceptions. So ku, for example, kaku and kiku, gu, isogu, nugu, bu, tobu, yobu, su, tatsu, and matsu, tachimas, machimas, nu, shinu, au, kau, au, warau. For su, it's hanas and kas. For mu, it's yomu and mun. So in the present tense, there are not many exceptions, except for these red ones, because tatsu becomes tachimas, matsu becomes machimas, hanasu becomes hanashimas, and kasu becomes kashimas. So these are some exceptions. It doesn't follow the simple stem to mass conversions for these verbs. But when it comes to the past tense form, then there are several exceptions for these cases. So as we just saw, past tense forms have the conjugations as TTA, NDA, that is for yonda, then ita, shta, and also there is one ida. So we will see now for each of these what are their past tense forms. So Ku. Kaku becomes kaita, as we have seen. Kiku becomes ita. For the gu category, isogu, it becomes isoida. So this is basically kind of ita only, but here in place of isoita, we write isoida. This is for the ease of pronunciation. So we have, with from our earlier discussions also, ta and da are interchangeably used for making the pronunciation easier. So for isogu, it's isoida and not isoita. Similarly, for nugu, it is nuida. Now, for the bu category, the NDA form is used. That is, tobu becomes tonda, yobu becomes yonda. For the tsu category, tatsu, it is tatta, matsu, it is matta. So there is no exception here. But why we have written here? Because in the present tense, we had this tachimas and nachimas. And also, in future, we will see that there are still some exceptions in some other forms as well. So these are basically exception categories. For the nu ending stem verbs, for example, shinu, which means to die, it is shinda. For au, it is atta, kau, katta. Again, there is no exception. So here, this one will be in pink color, isn't it? Varau becomes varatta. Again, there is no exception here, but we will see later. So I don't want to confuse you now because there are some other aspects as well, which we will see later. So I am trying to keep it simple since this is an introductory lesson of this verb conjugation. There are many things. There are many exceptions like in English and in any other language. You can consider your own mother tongue language and you know that in every language, in every grammar, there are always many exceptions. So there is a generic rule, and then on top of that generic rule, there are exceptions. So Japanese is no exception in this, but we will look into those exceptions step by step so that you do not get overwhelmed with lots of too much of information in the single lesson. For the tsu category, hanasu, it's hanashita. Kasu, it's kashita. It is shita. And for mu, it is yomu becomes yonda, mu becomes mu. So some of these we have discussed in the previous slides as well, but this is the complete category of the exception verbs of group 1 from the past tense point of view. So friends, that's all for today's lesson. I hope the lesson has been useful. So in the previous lesson, that is in lesson 111, we discussed about the stem to mass form conversion. And in today's lesson, we talked about the past tense form of group 1 stem verbs. And we shall continue this discussion in the next lesson as well. And if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, please do so. And we will see you again in the next lesson. So till then, arigato gozaimasu. Matai masho.